Just a night's journey. Just a night's journey. Just a night's journey. Just a night's journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our general session track. Before we welcome our panelists to the stage, please enjoy this brief video from DeepGram.
Hi, we're DeepGram. We built an end-to-end deep learning neural network.
A what?
Sorry, an AI speech platform that delivers actually usable transcriptions that get even better over time at lightning speed without high hardware costs or high transcription costs. And because we're better, faster, and cheaper, guess what? We're also more scalable. So if you've avoided building that great voice feature because you lack the right API, good news. It's time to get to work.
Triple espresso, please.
What could you do with accurate, real-time transcription? Oh, just off the top of our heads, you could create conversational AI, virtual assistants, voice analytics, agent enablement, compliance improvement, better customer experience, just to name a few. We're here to help you go big. If you don't know where to start, don't worry. In addition to providing the best technology stack, DeepGram makes an excellent partner. So if you're ready to stop chugging along on less than ideal solutions and start building the next great voice product, we're ready to help make it happen. DeepGram. No compromises, only opportunities.
All right, next up, we have our executive panel titled Executive Outlook, where we've been, where we are going. This session will explore AI and business concepts from the highest leadership level.
Welcome, panelists. Welcome, attendees. We have an outstanding panel that is coming up right now. I'm Daniel Lackland. I will be the moderator for said panel. And without any further ado, we are going to get into self-introductions. So I would love Upendra to kick it off. Why don't you tell the audience who you are and what sort of AI stuff you work on?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Upendra Mardikar. I am a chief security officer for fintech, which disrupts the lease to own, lending and buy now, pay later that you guys might have heard about. So I'm the chief security officer of that fintech company. We use AI in, addressing our customers and identifying our customers, as well as the security side of the equation. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure, Upendra. Cara, would you like to take it away and tell the audience who you are?
Thanks, Daniel. I'm Cara Athmann, Chief Technology Officer for Cardinal Group Companies. We are a fully integrated real estate investment and property management company. We focus a lot on student housing, but also conventional and affordable housing as well. We have been getting into artificial intelligence over the last probably 3 years as an integral part of our strategy going forward. So excited for this panel today.
All right, Ameen, would you like to give a self-introduction?
Hey, Daniel. Thank you. My name is Ameen Kazerouni. I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer for Orange Theory Fitness. Orange Theory effectively makes it easy to get more life out of your workout. It's one of the world's fastest growing franchise companies. And we've developed a pretty unique approach to a coach-led, science-backed, technology-tracked workout. So tech and data is native to our DNA and our experience. And I'm really excited to be working with the data at that company and talking to all of you about it today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ameen. Jacob, would you like to, last but not least, introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Jacob Agris. I'm the Chief Medical and Chief Innovation Officer here at ConvaTec. We're obviously a healthcare company that specializes in chronic care. Specifically, we're one of the leaders in wound care, ostomy care, infusion care, which has to do with diabetes, and lastly, intermittent catheterization or urology care. We use AI in a variety of different aspects to our work. Some of it has to do with how do we handle collecting data and working with regulators like the FDA, but some of it also has to do with how do we deliver the best possible experience for patients that have chronic conditions and how to use devices and have the best outcomes. So it's kind of a twofold use case.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jacob. We're very excited to hear all of your perspectives. As we can see here, we have a really diverse group, all of whom will have neat things to say. Patricia, let's jump into question number one. Okay, so for a lot of attendees here, I'm sure they're wondering exactly how important is AI. So to kick it off with sort of a higher level question, do you expect AI is going to change how businesses operate more dramatically than the shift to the web that occurred circa early 2000s? And we're going to have Ameen kick this question off.
That's a fun question. And I think that, I think there's two parts to think about that is one, how we define AI. It's a very fuzzy term, and I think there's a lot of fun definitions around it. And what some companies may call AI, other companies may just be referring to as exploratory data analysis, business intelligence. So I think let's just have an umbrella of all kind of data-related automations using machine learning, statistics, deep learning, etc. And I think, yes, absolutely, it's going to have a dramatic impact on the way businesses operate, because once used effectively, it can free up resources to focus on more innovation, on really building differentiators by driving automation where appropriate. You can drive a lot of operational efficiencies in your marketing landscape, supply chain, and areas like that. And Jacob, you mentioned it, that elevating experiences across the board, maybe in the medical space, in the fitness space. In my prior life, I optimized the retail shopping experience in an e-commerce business. It can be used to elevate experiences for patients, members, customers, whatever it may be. So it should have a dramatic impact. Whether it does or not, I think we'll see, but it should and has the potential to.
Excellent. Thank you, Ameen. Anyone else want to jump in on this contentious topic?
Yeah, Jacob, you want to go first? Please go ahead.
I'd love to hear what you have to say. Jump right in and let me see what I can add to it.
Okay, so and thank you. I mean, I agree with you. The way at least I was looking at this is earlier we had Web 1.0, right? I mean, that ended kind of around 2004, as we all know, right? Which is static pages. Then came the era of cloud, social, and mobile, right? I mean, with the advent of iPhones and Androids and the Facebooks and MySpaces of the world, right? I mean, we all know how the cloud actually picked up. I think we are ready for Web 3.0. We are at that cusp, which is, as we are seeing DeFis, as we are seeing permissionless blockchains coming up, Web 3.0, open, permissionless, and trustless environment is where the Web 3.0 is going. And as Tim Berners-Lee says, it's a semantic web, according to him, right? So I think edge computing, decentralized, and artificial intelligence, and sure, the definition I agree with, is, very nimble over here. But I think those are going to be three pillars in my mind as to where we see this future. But go ahead, Jacob, please.
No, I think you said it really well. I kind of find that intermittent phase where we've moved from servers to cloud really critical, because that brought us the data we need to do deep learning and AI. So really, I think things really changed or snapped, so to say, if we had the data at our fingertips, could clean it and then train AI. AI is a little bit like a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. You really have to have pretty clean data. I always explain to my team, if you're trying to identify, let's say, dogs and cats to your child, you can't have too many dogs labeled cats or your child is pretty confused. So we're still very dependent on clean data to do most applications. You certainly hear about fancy things where you don't need unsupervised learning, but that's really not here yet. The things we do now, we need that data, and that cloud has really driven that.
Excellent. Cara or Ameen, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I think, one additional point kind of along the lines where Ameen was going. To me, the biggest difference is that the experience for the customers, being able to be always on in a really positive way with some of these interactions. I think that's what's the most exciting part about this technology, is that we're able to take a certain segment of the work that used to be, whether it's online and very structured or, was voice to voice to a human, we're able to pull off a certain amount of work and handle that all with this different technology. And that to me is the game changer of, how does that change the customer experience as well as the employee experience as well, as far as not having folks doing some of those activities and being able to repurpose them for higher value, more experience-based interactions versus a lot of kind of the lower level things that the AI can take care of automatically. So that to me is the most exciting part of what's to come here.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you all for your perspective. So, Ameen, you mentioned definitions, and it sounds like everyone else kind of agree with you that definitions of AI can be a little bit fishy. When you're making a comparison like this, is there a definition that you feel is the most helpful for, let's say, a business setting to use when in a comparison like this? Or do you think even a question like that is sort of difficult to handle?
I think it's difficult to handle. And the way I think about it is anytime you're able to effectively use the data available to you to drive automation or operational efficiencies is really what you're referring to when you say how AI is going to help transform businesses. It's really a matter of automating simpler tasks and being able to do things faster, more efficiently by leveraging the data that you have available. And that's kind of the lens I view it through. But I don't know if that's the only definition or even the right one. It's a helpful lens, though.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. People love the word AI, but I'm not sure as we maneuver through our organizations, anybody can really define it well. I've tried to push us to use things like machine learning or neural networks, exactly what you're using rather than kind of this loose term. And it helps to also define what you're going to do with your data. To me, AI really says, I don't have a perfect model. I don't have a stochastic model like a statistician. I've got more of like a black box where I feed things in, and then I can predict things out the other side by training it. And that's really the big difference is it's modelless and it's trained. And I don't know if that helps or, if anyone disagrees with that from this panel.
That makes sense, Jacob. I think the way at least I was thinking about AI, and we have combinations of our own technology as well as we use vendors. Anybody who does simple linear regression, they also say, hey, we are AI-driven organization, So completely agreed with both Ameen and you in the sense that AI needs to be defined. And, we need to take the magic and the mystery out of AI. Right. I mean, and that is on to us. And that's why I'm so excited about, having this great conversation with esteemed people like you guys, is that how can we take the mystery and magic out of AI and bring it to everyday life? And I'm pretty bullish on AI and where it is going.
And I don't know what the experience is that some of the others of you have, but some AI things, I think there's a revolution now to make AI much more accessible and easy for standardized tasks where you can go online and almost have a visual interface of dropping objects and having and building a neural network that actually can classify something where nothing about AI. So I think there's a lot of progress on trying to make it simple for basic tests, but there are also difficult tasks where it's hard to make it simple.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting where we're going with this, because I think it's actually okay for people to call linear regressions AI, because you're drawing a line in the sand where the mathematical complexity of the model allows you to call it AI versus not call it AI, which I think is a little bit arbitrary. And I think companies that are, AI is native to them, where the product is AI, are a lot further along in this experience. And certainly in my prior life, we were building deep learning models and doing feature engineering and monitoring feature drift in real time and CI/CD deployment of neural nets. It's very complicated, and the whole ML ops kind of revolution to be able to do that at scale. And then there's also places where simple regression models in Excel are driving drastic operational efficiencies. And both are fine, and both are part of that kind of AI revolution. I think that it allows companies who maybe don't have infinite funding for compute and infinite access to data to leverage their data more efficiently and just drive a kind of general increase in productivity by using their data. And I think that AI definition sometimes lends complexity to just using your data efficiently within the realm of your capabilities, rather you jump straight to trying to build your first neural network, which I think really shoots you in the foot when you're getting started on the journey.
Excellent. That's an amazing segue into the next question. Patrika, would you mind jumping forward? Okay, great. So speaking of getting started and having AI success, what is your AI playbook and how would you advise another enterprise to set up their AI program in order to achieve success? Cara, would you mind kicking off this question with your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd put this in the category like a lot of new technology where it's really important to start with that business use case. I think it's really tempting to look at the technology and start with the technology first, but I think really starting with the business use case is just critical. So understanding what it is and how you are going to measure success up front and being really intellectually honest as things progress as to how it's going. And really it comes down to a ton of change management. So it's really interesting. Our workforce is, I'd say, very, it's definitely a younger demographic. We expect to be very, technology driven, things like that. Still requires a ton of change management. So especially in an area where, and obviously AI can take a lot of different forms. Sometimes you're in more, kind of back office advanced analysis, or sometimes it is, more customer and really, kind of your wider employee base facing. We started with something that was wide employee facing, interacting directly with the customer. And even with that, we very much had to really be mindful of the change management for those team members that, we were changing their world a little bit. We were taking away something that wasn't even their favorite part of the job. But it does still require that, change management. So I think being really mindful of that. So again, just kind of in summary there, really focusing on the business use case, those metrics, and then the change management all around it was just absolutely critical to the success of that rollout.
Excellent. Anyone else want to jump in on the playbook?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Cara, right? I mean, what is the business case, right? Typically I keep on saying that you don't need a jumbo jet to go to a grocery store. Right. So, if you have to grocery, pick up your car or whatever and bike or walk over there. Right. So really defining the business use case, seeing if AI is really a tool. It's just a tool after that in your tool chest. Right. I mean, just like you have a screwdriver, you have a hammer or wrench or whatever. It's one of the tools. Again, taking the mystery out of AI will be very super crucial. So completely agree with Cara. Is that what is the business case, and then trying to see if AI is the right solution for it.
Yeah, I'll second that. I think that, one thing that I've found is projects where you get buy-in from the stakeholders up front, rather than when you go with a complete product, are exponentially more likely to get adopted and have a successful production release. I think data and analytics and machine learning and AI teams get expensive because it's a group of very talented people that are in high demand and recruiting is difficult. So you want to encourage them to work on what excites them. And they end up building really expensive things that people aren't ready to use as yet. And I think that getting that stakeholder buy-in early, getting your business partners bought into what success looks like. They don't care about accuracy and precision and recall. They want to know what the outcome is going to be. So not measuring success as how accurate the model is, but how effectively you can impact change, and is what's going to lead to adoption. And I think adoption plays a kind of non-trivial role in AI projects failing, is that you can have it complete and just not see adoption if you're not a very tech-forward, tech-native company. So I definitely agree. I think measures of success defined upfront is critical. And also like to point out the irony of, like, as you're defining AI, I think the lights going off are a function of movement, and that's AI right there. It's a machine without human intelligence responding to external stimuli. And you can see it goes wrong. You sit stationary, the lights go off, you're in darkness. So even the simplest form of artificial intelligence has its issues. And we see that every day.
Adoption is really more widespread than most people believe. I mean, just getting up this morning, if you've got a thermostat that's smart, and I don't want to throw too many company names out there, like a Nest or something, it bumped up the temperature for you. If it's a cold climate, if it's a hot climate, it may have lowered the temperature. It's a little cooler when you get up, and then, you probably grab your phone and you take a look to see what your schedule is with your assistant. You may send a quick note with Siri, which is clearly AI that's been used for a long time. I'm not sure if it's perfect. That's some of the things it says are a little odd to me, but it's still helpful because I don't have to get out of bed. And then, I had to find a flight to get to Boston. So that was AI. And then, by the time I got here, searching for the flight used AI. You'd be amazed how much AI is embedded in your life every day and how much it's changed from where we were, 5 to 6, 7 years ago. So it's finding the right applications. One of the best may be Google Maps, where there's barely a human on the planet that seems to not know what it is or use it. And then there's all those other 50,000 plus apps in the App Store that don't get used. So, use case is really important. I think that was one point that Cara pointed out. And then it's also the user interface and the usability of that app. The use case may be right, but the implementation may be wrong. I see that in medicine all the time, in that we may have the right use case, but we didn't engage the patient or the physician or the healthcare provider in the right way. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that, but AI is already here.
So I'd agree with that it's already here, and so much of the workforce is using it in their day-to-day life. I think the interesting part, though, is that when you're making your own choice to use it, feels different than when your company is choosing it for you. So that's where I'd say, hey, regardless of whether we thought, and again, to use our example where we were taking away, a certain number of phone calls that were very rote, very repetitive, people just calling in, asking to schedule a tour with an apartment community. And as soon as you take that away, there's still that fear. So I would say no matter what, there's still that very big bell curve of people that will kind of work against change if you're not spending the time up front. Even if you do spend the time up front to really get people on board, no matter what, you're still always having that change management hurdle, even if it's something that makes life easier. And totally agree, people are interacting with it all the time, but I think that change is always be a very matter, no matter what.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for all your perspective. I am curious. So all of you were talking about defining the business problem up front. It's like a very common theme. Does anyone have a story of maybe a project that went well because you defined the problem up front, or a problem of a time when maybe you had sort of a learning lesson from a situation where you didn't, get stakeholder buy-in up front and define the problem up front? I'm curious if anyone would have something like that to share.
Sure, I'll start with one that went well. So for us, and I'd say it went well in the end, but it certainly was still a challenge from a management perspective. So for us, we leveraged it product that was able to have natural language conversation with prospects. People call into an apartment, they want to ask questions about, how close is it to the university, does it have a pool, what's rent, what's availability, ask all those questions. So we put in a product that used AI and ML to have that natural language conversation with that person. Pass the Turing test is really strong as far as, its ability to have that conversation, questions. And it went really well. So from a client-facing perspective, from a prospect-facing perspective, it was a very positive experience. They were able to interact, 24/7, holidays, doesn't matter, late at night, they're able to text, which was really positive, versus coming in from a phone call through an IVR or something like that. So across the board, I'd say from that prospect perspective, it's really positive. And again, they didn't know that they're interacting with the point that, people often, we're sharing personal details with bot. So a very positive experience from that side. And I'd say, even for our on-site members that were interacting with it too, some of the points that other panelists have mentioned, we worked really hard to get, or it didn't require extra work or different administrative work, right? So yes, we have this piece that interact, make sure everything was integrated so that we weren't adding, kind of additional admin members. So yes, definitely a lot of work from a change management perspective, but overall it was very successful, where it was able to perform as well, if not better, because it was able to capture all of those actions when the customer wants to act, right? Not during business hours, they're able to come in whenever they want, in a very quick way and get things scheduled. And the thing I like the best about it, about the particular product, is that it didn't force the customer into a specific interaction, right? It let them use their own words, let them use shorthand, it let them use all, really meeting the customer on it. And that, I think, was so roll out.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for your perspective. Anyone else have a story to share regarding, a playbook story, or a playbook lesson maybe that went well or poorly?
I like Cara's story. I hope it tells me if I can bring my dog, though.
It would tell you. It can answer pet policy as well.
I mean, I can give you an example in healthcare, and I think looking at problems, the lens we try to look at them through is the problem, not solvable by a human and solvable by AI. And not all problems fit that metric. So, some of the things we looked at are finding rare diseases. Well, they're difficult for physicians or for healthcare providers because they only see one of them in their lifetime or two or three, but AI could be trained to leverage that data. It's not as simple as we thought, but that's an example where, we've tried to be able to identify those rare diseases that are sometimes missed 80% of the time. So again, the bar isn't too high to be better than the human, which is also helpful. And there's other projects where, you want to look for those kind of opportunities, I think, that leverage large amounts of data or leverage on, rare events that AI might be able to identify more easily. Another one's wound care. Being able to measure a wound sounds pretty easy, but if you think about when you scraped your knee or something, you had to measure just what's the square area of that to know if it's healing. It's not so easy to do by a human, just to guess. So that's an area where convolutional neural networks and AI may really help the person do their job.
That's great. Thank you, Jacob. So another thing I can also share is that, in the cyber world, when we were getting attacked, and I'm talking about the previous employer, we were, efficiently worked on the traditional way of non-AI way of trying to protect ourselves against those cyber attacks, especially the password spraying / credential stuffing attacks that's prevalent in the industry. For those who don't know those attacks, essentially what happens is that because of lots of compromises all across the username and passwords, you can consider them to be compromised. And what these attackers try to do is that they try to use the same username password, because most of us use the same username and password across multiple sites. They use the same username and passwords and try it on multiple companies, right? So one of the things is that don't use the same username and passwords, keep them separate, but people do that. So, we were able to, detect and protect our site successfully using traditional methods. But then, we started thinking about AI at that particular point once the fire drill was over. So at that time, we tried to curate data and the data set. So just, data are just observations or measurements, and data set is a structured collection, So what we tried to do was just go start digging the data, and it took lots of non-data engineers to go and dig that data. And then we were able to do machine learning in the batch mode, if you will, and start feeding in those models at the front end. And then the amount of information that we were able to gather was just, eye-opening for all of us. So it was a great experience. Obviously, being a security staff, I cannot share more details, but I thought that was a great success as to how we took one step and then moved and, created a movement around.
Excellent. Well, we'll jump in. Unless anyone has another story to share, we will go into the next question. Does anyone have anything else? All right, great. Patricia, want to jump to the next question? Okay, so how much investment of resources is necessary to drive positive AI outcomes at the enterprise level? And for all the panelists, feel free to talk about capital, but also dedicated employees, vendors, and anything related to getting this stuff off the ground. Jacob, would you like to kick off this question?
Sure. I think you have to frame your problem. everybody wants a magic formula for this, but the reality is it depends on the problem you want to solve. Some things are available almost off the shelf where you can hire a vendor to solve the entire problem. They've already solved for many other companies. And I know more about healthcare, so I have to apologize less about apartments and some of the other things you guys have worked on, but it's fascinating. So for example, they want to, collect adverse events and report them for drugs, meaning something bad happened. There are companies that are specialized in this and can deploy a whole system for you to do the coding and identification when people call in with complaints into certain categories. But there are other much more difficult problems that, I described earlier. Let's say you want to measure a wound that may not have already been done. You may have to build it yourself. If you need to do some model training, tweaking, and building internally, you are going to need some of these resources that, like Ameen talked about, that are not always, they're in high demand. They're not inexpensive, which is a way of saying expensive. And sometimes a little finicky, like a sports player, but it can cost you a fair amount of money to put together a team of 6 or 8 people. On the flip side, I'm not sure you need a team. Google may have 1,000. I'm not sure that's what you need to do a lot of the projects you want to do. Google's trying to build new models. There's 20 or 30 models out there, and they really take care of most problems if you know how to use them for whatever your problem is: segmentation, classification, we call boxing, or localization, and use them in those purposes. So what I would say is, first figure out what your problem is that you want to solve. Where are you going to apply this? Is it internal? Is it outside facing? What vendors could you use? Either already solved solutions at scale, or do you need to have a vendor help you build it, or do you want to build a team to build it? I do believe if you use vendors and you don't have any internal capabilities, it's easy to be taken advantage of, so to say. You may have that regression model instead of that deep learning model you were thinking about. So you do need some internal capabilities to run your vendors. But this is an exciting area, and teams, small teams can go a long ways. I suspect in many of the things people build in manufacturing and real estate and others, you have huge teams to do things. It's amazing what a team of a dozen or less can do in this area. And I'd love to hear, Ameen's and Cara's experience with this as well.
Jacob, I couldn't agree more with a lot of the points you made, which is I'm a really firm believer in focusing on building your own differentiators and investing your resources on the things that's going to differentiate you, and then kind of vending out things that you can vend out. The one kind of rule of thumb that has helped me has been investing resources in kind of what I've come to call data industrialization or data engineering. I think that a good set of data engineers will allow you to very efficiently leverage vendors and build models and drive change pretty quickly, because I think we're coming to that inflection point where companies realized machine learning, analytics, AI was important a while ago. It's been a long time. And what they did was they started collecting every piece of information that was available to them. And now we've got companies with large volumes of data and relatively inaccessible formats without strong metadata, without a strong understanding of how it connects, all their data assets connect. So I think investing there gives you unlocks that, which reduces that bill that a vendor shows up with, because 90% of the work they're doing is just cleaning it up and then sticking a simple model on top of it. So I think investing in that data industrialization and governance process is critical. I think Upendra probably loves that, because with governance comes security, which is a good side benefit of strong governance.
I mean, no, I just want to jump in real quick to say I couldn't agree with you more on this data point. I don't think people realize we spend 70-80% of our time on cleaning data, accurate data, annotating data, tagging data. The machine learning part's only 20% or so of the effort, or 30 at the most. And I suspect that's very similar in other industries, or even more of the time. It sounds like you talked about 90%.
Yeah, it can get pretty expensive pretty quickly.
Yeah, it can.
Yeah,
Auto-driving cars, I can give you an example that some companies that build the systems for those, which wouldn't surprise you, like NVIDIA and others have talked about 5,000 people just to annotate data. Has nothing to do with building the model.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty consistent story across every industry, at least in my experience as well. As so thinking about how to successfully do that, would echo some of what the others have said as far as, it is important to have that architecture resource or that expertise in-house. I think that's an important piece to have. I think sometimes companies start with lower level folks, and then it's really hard because you don't have the right architecture in place. So as you try to get into some more of the advanced analytics or AI, you're kind of inheriting or starting from a point where you've got a lot of technical debt. So I think that's an important piece when you're thinking about building this in-house, to have that right resource in-house. I'm a big fan of hybrid, of bringing in some specialized consultants to help partner with the internal resources. I think that kind of gets you the blend of both worlds, where if you have some internal expertise, you've got good kind of some accountability there, as well as the kind of that long-term sustainability as well. But I think there's a great benefit in getting the folks that are living and breathing this day in, day out across a variety of industries. I might be a little biased because I come from a consulting background as well, but before, what I really like there too is that a lot of times you can have folks that are bringing ideas and best practices from other industries into your own industry. And I always really value that as well. I think that's a great way to look at some different industry challenges in a different way, and just kind of get the best of all worlds there.
Yeah, this is a great perspective. So, the way at least I was thinking about it is that there are two ways, right? First is, do you have a top-down executive support and overall buy-in? Or the second thing is, are these grassroots efforts, right? So these are the two ways actually. Either way, starting small and having, maybe a few dedicated folks is going to help, right? So driving based on occurs, like objective key and key results, and delivering, incremental value, and then gaining the support is the way to do it, in my opinion. And that is how, I was successfully able to do it in my organizations. And, another thing is, any big initiatives, you say that, hey, this is going to be an AI program or anything like that. It's very difficult for an organization to have a sustained attention span. There are so many new things are happening. So having this demonstrating continuous value to the organization is pivotal to program success, because the attention span of all these people are going to be very, very less. So, and if you're a startup, for example, just go ahead and start the data curation from start, right? I mean, it's like AI by design and AI by default. But if you're a big corporation, retrofitting that AI into the existing machinery is going to be super difficult. So I agree with Cara. At that particular point, you may just go ahead and hire some consultants, have, dedicated architect, and hire some consulting organization, has seen the movie, been there, done that before. That becomes, an easier journey.
Upendra, just a quick question. I would assume, like healthcare, it applies a lot for security, but when you try to release these applications, there's a huge amount of effort on the testing, validation and verification aspects. We look very carefully at them to make sure they're actually doing what they're supposed to do. And if they're customer facing, you certainly want them to do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So there is the development, which is the DevOps and then DevSecOps, and make sure that we have, I'm going to throw in some acronyms over here, but don't want to digress, SaaS, DAST, IST, all these, dependency checks, and with the supply chain attacks, with SolarWinds and all that, that becomes, absolutely essential. But one of the things that Ameen mentioned, which caught my attention, and I want to underline that, was ML ops and data ops, right? So as we are thinking about not just dev ops and putting DevSecOps, how can we think about data ops and putting in data SecOps, and ML ops and putting in ML SecOps? So and we have to protect our AI engines as well as leverage AI for security. So completely agreed. All these verifications are super critical. Streamlining it, automating it, and potentially hyper automating it, is the way to go in my opinion. But good question. Thank you for that, Jacob.
All right, Patricia, you want to jump to the next topic? Okay, so this has come up a little bit. How do we demonstrate value on AI projects and gain internal support, given murky timelines and sometimes hard to measure results when it comes to AI projects? And Upendra, I know you just spoke, but would you like to kick this one off? Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this certainly is an issue, right? Especially if you are selling to a non-tech executives, how do you demonstrate value, right? And how do you gain that internal support? It's a chicken and egg problem. So I'm just acknowledging that, whether first I need an investment to demonstrate value, and then you're not gonna get investment because, we don't understand the value, right? So the way to I was thinking about it is get the basics first, right? So what that means is that when we are painting this AI vision, again, getting back to what Cara was saying, what are the use cases? What is the problem that you are trying to solve? Is it more like from the security perspective, is it KYC problem? Is it identity verification problem? Is it AML problem? Or, the non-security wise, is it marketing analytics, user experience? There are multiple kind of dimensions to the problem. What is the problem you are trying to solve? Then another way to basically go and approach it and consider is to use whatever tools and data sets that you already have. Lots of organizations, they already have lots of data and potentially data sets if you're lucky. Otherwise, curating that particular data will be the next steps. And, organizations might not have all the data that you need. And so having those occurs and then highlighting the key differences between non-AI and AI methods, it has become super critical. To answer your question, we have to go ahead when we are embarking on this journey, start small, and just go ahead and show incremental value to the team members.
Sure, anyone else want to jump in?
Sure, just to kind of echo a little bit of that, definitely agree with the incremental value. I think a lot of times if you break apart the project and think about, hey, where can we start to show that there's value, particularly in the model, and maybe there's some other integrations or some other components that can come later so you don't disappear for 9 months while you're building out this use case. So anything that could be done to show that value and true, like to Upendra's point there, really drive that there is really proof that we're going to be able to solve the business case. I think that's just critical up front. I think really thinking about the success metrics is really important too. I think so many times, and I think autonomous vehicles hit this issue all the time, where a lot of times people are comparing the technology to perfect, and perfect isn't what we have now, right? So I think that's where it's really important to say, okay, whatever the metric is, if we're driving, or even in the medical field, right? If the error rate is 30%, we're able to get it down to 25% or whatever that use case is, really being clear up front with what success looks like, because I think by nature, everyone defaults to, we expect the technology to be perfect, and it's just not going to be. So I think that's a really critical part of selling the value too, of really showing where you're at today and what the technology is able to do to enhance that.
I think that brings up an interesting point. It's not exactly aligned with what you were asking, but AI is interesting because you train it on a limited set of data frequently. I mean, you don't have like 100 million data points typically, sometimes you do. And as you release it, you get more and more data. And a lot of companies that are startups have very little data because data is expensive. It's expensive to get, expensive to curate, expensive to retain and maintain the privacy. So whatever plan you put out there must include, what are you going to do if you need to retrain? Like, what is your metric of success that Cara talked about? It has to be 95%, 90%, whatever that number is. And then am I going to need to retrain? Maybe I release a product that's not quite at that standard, but as I get data, I retrain. Do you retrain on the fly? Like with Siri, as you correct it, it's retraining. It's retraining on the fly. So that's got to be baked into your plan. And I'm not sure whether everyone starts down the road understanding that it's a commitment. It's like a child. It's a commitment to continue sending it to school or them to school. And you sort of have to do the same with your AI, or look for other data sources and throw out a term called federated data, where we try to borrow data that we don't want to make the company think we're taking their data or that we're compromising patients' privacy, so that we can use the data to train at multiple locations and refuse it, but refuse the data together, not refuse. So I don't know others' perspective on this, but I think that retraining and that federated data models, you need to think those out very carefully up front, that your success also improves over time with AI, or at least that type of AI that you're trying to train.
I echo all of your points there. I think that, and Cara, I think you've said it a few times now, with defining the measures of success early is probably the most critical, because you'll get somewhere using these technologies, and you want to make sure that that somewhere is compared against a realistic benchmark. And I honestly, I've in my experience always taken it even a step further and translated the accuracy of the model to whatever business outcome your stakeholders measure themselves against, because it's usually easier to digest an X% improvement, let's say in CAC in the marketing world, or a Y% improvement in replenishment timelines in the supply chain world, than it is to say this forecasting model is 75% accurate, because 75% accurate sometimes sounds pretty bad. But when you think about that compared to what it used to be, it's substantially better. And I've always found an easier tool is to translate the accuracy into a measure of success that the stakeholders already used to measuring themselves against. And I think that's helped a lot in my experience in getting models out the door. And to Jacob's point, you need to kind of get it live to iterate on it. And it's really hard you're going to hit a ceiling, and it's really hard to get past that in that retrospective study. You want to get it out there and learn from how it's behaving in the wild.
Excellent. Thank you all for your perspective. Let's jump to the last question we're going to have time for. We have about 5 minutes left for reference. The next question is, which tools, technologies, or platforms are mission critical to your AI projects, and why? And Ameen, if you would go ahead and kick off this question.
This is a really, really broad question, and it's a tough one to answer, because it goes back to everything we've been discussing in terms of what are you trying to solve for. And I think you want to break it up into a few families or types of technology based off where you are as an organization. I think if you're just getting started, investing in centralizing your data warehouse in ETL tools for DAG orchestration to make sure your data is flowing through a clean technical chain of custody and is accessible and usable. And to Cara's point, bringing in specialized consultants to help you maybe architect or design what that's going to look like for your future state. I think Upendra mentioned this earlier, where ML ops and DevOps and data ops are really, all the ops are so important, because it's critical to make sure that at the end of the day, all you're doing is, this idea of infrastructure as code extending out to your ML and AI solutions. And Jacob, you mentioned partnering with the right vendors to kind of build the automations that can allow you to take the steps you need to without investing heavily in your internal resources. And I think that's a bit of a cop-out answer, because I didn't name any tools and technologies, but I'd rather talk about the different areas in which you could invest than name a few kind of open source services and vendors that I'm currently working with.
Sure. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, one of the things in security, right? I mean, security is more like a TSA problem, right? I mean, TSA, transport security, thing that you see at the air. Jacob, you might have just gone through that.
Probably.
There are very, very few terrorists, right? I mean, most of us are passengers. So what happens in security is that the data is very skewed. in the sense that most of the data is customer traffic, regularization becomes key, right? So, when we are using traditional AI models with hand-designed features, it has its own limitations in security, right? So what we are thinking, and we are not there yet, we are exploring new ways how we can use the CNNs, the convolutional neural networks, and with some, hyperparameter regularization, that can automatically, for example, for ransomware, right, automatically extract the malicious code while, avoiding the need to manually, do any feature selection. Again, regularization algorithms, so that we don't have an overfitting problem. So those kinds of tools and technologies is what we are considering right now for security use cases.
No, just to follow up on that, if you're just getting started and you want to learn a little bit about it, there's lots of little online courses and things. If you get on any one of the cloud providers, they'll give you some free time on there. You can go play with some of the visual type tools and see how AI works. And then as you build your organization, you may then talk about things like TensorFlow and containers and so forth. But you can start out just honestly on a Saturday afternoon, just trying it out. You can separate flowers on Google's platform under there. And I'm not advertising any one platform over another. They all have tools that you could take a look at. The one there's called AutoML, and there's others. And you think, oh, what could that possibly do? They've given examples. They've built neural networks to like separate out skin lesions, those that are like melanoma or other malignancies from non-malignancies, using these type tools. They're actually pretty effective. So I would say you got to play a little bit to learn a little bit about what this whole field is about. I know that doesn't answer the question either, Upendra. Maybe someone else has a better answer with tools.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, I'm a big fan of the cloud providers too. I mean, we've happened to kind of invest in the Google platform from a resource perspective. I think especially if you've got a small team, it's helpful to pick one. And there's any number, AWS, Microsoft, right? And any of those have good options. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about technology in recent years is everybody's gotten to be more modular. So you're not, once you invest in one platform, you're not locked into that. You use the best of breed of some other platforms as well. So, but yeah, to me, it's an easy place to start is one of those platforms where, again, there's a lot of resource, a lot of free training. Everybody's interested in getting your data, so they're happy to let you play on their platform and start to get wet building out some of these programs. And those programs can easily go to production. I mean, those are certainly you can start out with some proof of concept, but easily that can be part of your production platform as well.
I love where this went, because we literally saw like different stages, and like I think Upendra is talking about like hyperparameter tuning and regularization and probably like monitoring, like feature stores. There's now service providers that are providing feature stores wrapped as a technology tool, which is really just a really high throughput database storing features for retrieval with additional mechanisms for measuring drift and this and that for certain features. So it really depends on where you are at the AI journey. You're likely going to have a tool or a technology or an open source service to help with every module. And I think to Cara's point, it's exactly that. Figuring out what you need, identifying your cloud provider, and making your architectural investment be very deliberate and thoughtful and internal, so you can swap out modules as you move along that journey for just the various parts that you'll require to do different phases of artificial intelligence and machine learning at scale in your production environments.
Wow, what an amazing panel. Anyone else have any final thoughts before we bid our attendees goodbye and wrap up? My thoughts are that we've learned a bunch of things, first and foremost of which is that recruiting data scientists is akin to a sports draft, which has stuck in my mind. All right, thank you so much, all the panelists. If you will stick here after so we can quickly debrief. Thank you to our attendees, and I'll kick it back over to Patrika right now.
Thank you all so much. That was awesome. A big virtual round of applause. Please make your way to your next session. Also, don't forget to check out the networking, accept your connection request, and explore the AI exhibits. Have a great time.